All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our Beat the Bloat webinar hosted by Dr. Ashley Aperocho. I'm Olivia with Ethos Integrative Medicine. Today, I'll be moderating this webinar. Before we start, please remember to mute your microphones. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat at any point in time. We'll be sure to answer them at the end. If you have any specific questions pertaining to your personal care, we cannot address that tonight in this webinar, but I highly recommend scheduling a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ashley. She'll be able to answer your questions and help you to navigate treatment options. So I'll go over more information about that at the end. Today is all about bloating. So if you feel like your digestion could be better, or you're tired of feeling bloated all the time, you're in the right place. We've got a ton of great information to share with you tonight. I'd like to start off our webinar by introducing our amazing resident physician, Dr. Ashley Aperocho. She strives to bring the body back into balance and get her patients back to feeling like their best self. At the office, she helps patients manage their stress and hormones, sleep, mood, and treats digestive concerns and overall health. And a fun fact is that she's an incredible acupuncturist, and our patients have seriously been loving her acupuncture magic. So I hope you all get the chance to connect with her at our office. And without further ado, I'll let her get started with her presentation.
Great, thanks so much for the intro, Olivia. Is the volume okay on your end?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend part of your evening with me. Today we're going to be talking about bloating. Great. So just a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Ashley. I'm currently practicing as a naturopathic physician, and I am a first-year resident currently at Ethos Integrative Medicine here in Scottsdale, Arizona. I went to school at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, which is up in Toronto, Canada, and I graduated in May 2021. So I am Canadian. I do come from Canada, and so if you notice that I do have an accent, it's because of that. And as Olivia mentioned earlier, my care philosophy is that I aim to help bring the body back into balance. And so I do believe that the body is infinitely wise, and sometimes it just needs a little nudge in the right direction. Okay, so let's get started. So to start off this webinar, I want to start with a quote from Hippocrates. Hippocrates said, "All disease starts in the gut." So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about bloating. So I'm going to define what bloating is. I'm going to go through some common causes of bloating. I'm going to talk about how it affects your mood and energy, the testing that can be done about it, and then some take homes for you. So that let's beat this bloat. Okay, so what is bloating? Bloating is the accumulation of gas or fluid that causes abdominal distension. So what that means is either it's an accumulation of gas, like belching or burping that accumulates and it comes out the top end, or it's accumulation of gas and it comes out as flatulence on the other end. And then sometimes also we'll have fluid retention, and that's just your body swelling. And so sometimes we can notice that our faces can get swollen, or even also like our abdominal area can get swollen and can start retaining fluids. So what are the main causes of that? So I've split them up into gas and fluid. So the gas causes that I'm going to be talking about today are going to be stress, dysbiosis, and food sensitivities and intolerances. And then on the fluid side, I'm going to be talking about dehydration. And then I'm just going to be touching on hormonal. I'm not going to go too much into that just because we could probably talk about hormones for days. Okay, so getting started. So about your GI tract, your digestive tract. If you're not already aware, we have our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight response. So that is our stress response. And then we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our resting and digesting. And then we also have the enteric nervous system. And so it's also known as the gut brain. And so it is innervated by cranial nerve 10, also known as the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve is what connects our brain to our guts. And so it's kind of that highway tract. It kind of communicates with each other. The interesting thing about the enteric nervous system is, let's say we cut off that vagus nerve, we would still be able, our enteric nervous system is so complex that it is still able to function without signals from the vagus nerve at all. So it's able to act independently, which is pretty cool. So that's why it's kind of, it is called like our second brain. So just a little bit of basics for the GI tract, because we are going to be talking about it. I just want to set a firm foundation just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So digestion begins with our senses. So our sight, our smell, and taste. So this evening, depending on what time zone you're joining in from, hopefully you've already eaten dinner, and if not, hopefully you're making dinner or eating it right now. When we see food and when we start to smell food, so let's say there's like this big juicy burger in front of me. As I look at that burger and as I smell the burger, usually, and so for you vegetarians out there, we can have a portobello burger, a vegetarian burger as well. When we see and smell food, it already starts to warm up our digestive system. So we start to salivate and we start to make gastric juices, and all of those things start to prep and prime our digestive tract to be able to take in the food that we're about to eat. So the way that I like to think about it, it's kind of like warming up before you go for your 10K run. It's important that you stretch and that you do some lateral exercises, make sure that your muscles are warm before just sprinting off into the races. The same thing happens with our digestive tract. It's important that everything is ready and revved up to go, so that you're ready to actually intake that first bite. So once you have that first bite of food, as you chew in your mouth, you are masticating. So masticating is the act of chewing. You are chewing that food and breaking it down physically into smaller bits. That is the first step. So we have the mechanical and physical breakdown of food in our mouth. And then once we swallow, peristalsis, which is the movement, the downward movement, which happens all throughout the digestive tract. So it happens in our esophagus, happens through our intestines, our small intestine, our large intestine, and then it lets it evacuate out of the other end. So we have this food bolus, so just that chewed up food that's going down our esophagus. It goes down our esophagus and then it lands into our stomach. Once it's in our stomach, more gastric juice is secreted, and it breaks down the food further. And as that continues to get mixed up and churned up, it then goes into the duodenum, which is the junction between our stomach and the beginning part of our small intestine. And so it's in the duodenum that our gallbladder releases bile and our pancreas releases pancreatic juices. And it just all kind of meets to allow for the further breakdown of food so that we can essentially turn food into energy, because that's what digestion essentially is. And so as it moves through the long tract of the small intestine, it continues to get broken up into smaller and smaller pieces, and it goes through and gets absorbed into the body through our small intestine. Once going through the small intestine and we've absorbed all of the nutrients that we can out of it, it goes into our large intestine, which is where we absorb the water bits. So we dry up the bits of food that weren't able to be digested. And it's in our large intestine that, the extra gets excreted out. So now that we have that basis, let's talk about how stress affects that and can cause gas and bloating. So as I talked about earlier, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight response. So that is our stress response. And we have the parasympathetic system, which is our rest and digest, which promotes digestion. When we're under stress, stress decreases motility, which means that it decreases those peristaltic movements. So it causes food to get stuck. So if you ever have indigestion, indigestion is that sensation where food is just kind of like stuck in your stomach. That is a symptom of decreased motility. We also have decreased secretions. So that means that you're having decreased saliva, decreased decrease stomach acid, decrease bile, and decrease pancreatic enzymes, which means that you're having food that's less broken down, and that you're having food chunks that are not being effectively broken down and actually turned into energy. So you just have food chunks that are moving right through you. We also have decreased absorption. That's because of the food chunks. It's not actually being broken down further. And in the sympathetic, it actually causes our sphincters. So our sphincters are the junctions between each organ. So for example, at the end of the esophagus, we have a sphincter there that regulates what comes into the stomach, also at the end of the stomach, and then at the end of the small intestine, and then out. So those are the sphincters. And this is sympathetic response. When we're stressed, those sphincters get really tight. So in the parasympathetic response, we have increased motility, we have increased secretions, so we have more of those gastric juices to help further chemically break down food. So there's the physical breakdown of food, which happens when we chew our food, and then there's the chemical breakdown of food, which happens with all of the enzymes and juices and all that stuff that gets pumped into it so that we can extract as much out of it. We have increased absorption, which is good. That feeds into our mood and our energy because we're actually able to absorb the food that we're putting into our bodies, and then it relaxes our sphincters. So the reason why stress can cause increased gas and bloating in our digestive tract is due to that decreased motility. So it's allowing food to just hang out in our digestive tract for longer than usual. And that can cause bacteria to just try to break it down and create that gas and bloating. So the best way that I like to describe that is if you've ever made a loaf of bread, how do you make bread? So you take yeast and water and you mix that together. And you need to feed that yeast. And so usually you put like a couple of spoonfuls of sugar, mix it in. I don't bake bread. So if for any of the bread bakers, I'm so sorry if I'm like butchering this, but you do have to feed the sugar, or you do have to feed the yeast. And usually that's with sugar. And so once you mix it all up, I think you add flour.
Yeah.
Anyways, you mix it all up, it becomes a dough, and you put a towel over it and let it rise. When that dough is rising, it is the yeast that is eating the sugars and breaking those down and creating gas. That same process happens in our digestive system. And so the longer that food sits in a certain area, the more gas and bloating that it can produce. This is just a slide talking about the things I just talked about. So gas and bloating can be caused because of decreased motility. It down-regulates our gastric and pancreatic secretions. So that means that food isn't actually able to be broken down in its smaller constituents. So it's just like food chunks. So it allows it to ferment and make gas in there. So that's the cause from stress. So the next cause of gas and bloating is food intolerances and sensitivities. So I just want to differentiate that I'm not talking about food allergies. And food allergies are mediated by an IgE response. What that means is that our bodies, when you have a food allergy, our bodies have now made antibodies to attack that food source whenever it comes into our bodies. So here's an example. So I am allergic to kiwi. So every time I eat kiwi, every time I'm exposed to kiwi, my body is going to make antibodies and attack that kiwi. That response can either be a delayed allergic response, or it can be an immediate allergic response. A delayed response looks like hives, itching, redness, swelling. An immediate response can be as severe as an anaphylactic response. And so you can have swollen lips, and a swollen tongue, pins and needles in your tongue, throat closing, the whole 9 yards there. So just to reiterate, food allergy, if you do have a true food allergy, every time you're exposed to that certain food, you will have a reaction without fail. That's a food allergy. So a food intolerance or a food sensitivity, on the other hand, is when, let's take lactose as an example. So let's say you have a glass of milk, and sometimes with that glass of milk, you do okay. Sometimes you don't do okay. That is more of an intolerance or a sensitivity. And that points us towards you having a lack of enzymes needed to digest that food. So it's a hit or miss. And so especially with lactose in general, sometimes people are more sensitive to milk if they're drinking straight milk, but sometimes they can tolerate yogurt or cheeses because it has less of that lactase, which is that milk, milk sugar. Yes. Okay, cool. So in this diagram, this is just gonna explain it a little bit further. So we're gonna take the lactose intolerance as the example to talk about food intolerance and sensitivities. So when you drink that glass of milk or have that yogurt, it's going to have a milk sugar. And so milk sugar is called lactose. In order to break up lactose into its basic constituents, you need the enzyme lactase. And so without lactose is not able to be broken up into glucose and galactose. And so in this first example, lactose is you drink that glass of milk or you have that latte, and that milk is going through your system. It finally makes its way into the small intestine. It's kind of just like puttering along. And if you have the enzyme lactase, it's able to come up to the lactose molecule and break it up into glucose and galactose, where then your body is able to absorb those simple carbohydrates, those sugars, and then put it into our energy cycle to make ATP and to make energy. If we do not have enough of that enzyme, so if we don't have enough lactase, just because of our genetics and just being able to inherit that gene, if we don't have enough of that enzyme to break down lactose will continue to go through the small intestine, leach into the large intestine without being broken down. And then it's in the large intestine that bacteria will eat it and break it down and cause that fermentation process and cause that gas and bloating. So that's how food intolerances and sensitivities fit into the gas and bloating picture. As we go down, I'm going to touch on this in the future, but I just want to give you a heads up that as we go down in the digestive tract, we get more and more bacteria in there. So as we move further down, like our small intestine should not have that much bacteria, but our large intestine has billions of bacteria. And so the more bacteria, the more sugar that's in there, the more fermentation, the more gas and bloating. And then the last, I put in this slide actually just for, because I think it's quite interesting. So you can also have cross reactivity to certain types of pollen. So let's say you have seasonal allergies. I have seasonal allergies to grass pollen and birch pollen in particular. And so sometimes our seasonal allergies can cross react with fruits that are in season when they're harvested. And so instead of sometimes a food might come up as being sensitive, but it might actually just be a cross sensitivity to an environmental allergy that you already have, where that pollen was blown onto that fruit at the time of harvesting, and that cross reactivity. So you're not actually reacting to the fruit itself, but you're reacting to the pollen that was on the skin of the fruit, or that. And so I think that that's important to keep in mind, especially for those of us who have seasonal allergies, and especially here also in the desert. The desert has a lot more things that I'm used to. So that's also something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so that brings us to dysbiosis, which is the last gas-like thing that can cause bloating in our system. So what is dysbiosis? Dysbiosis is an imbalance in gut bacteria. So if we look at our top picture here in the green, our homeostasis, this is ideal. So we want to see, I'm going to kind of classify them as bad. The freeloaders, they don't really necessarily do anything. The commensal bacteria, the yellow and the greens. And then I'm going to classify the purple and the blues as good bacteria. So the orange and red ones are the bad ones. These ones in the middle are just kind of like the freeloaders. They're neither good or bad. And then these ones here at the end are the good bacteria. So there can be three types of situations. We can either have an overgrowth of the bad bacteria. So it just kind of, the way that I like to think about this is we have a nice fresh yard with nice green grass, and it's just an overgrowth of the weeds. So weeds are kind of taking over your lawn, your nice green grass. So that's kind of like this situation, this first situation. This middle situation is just reduced diversity. So that means that we just don't have as many colors in here. So when things come, or if things kill off that, like certain strains, if they're sensitive to that, it just means that we don't have the variety that we like in that situation. And then the last situation is a loss of beneficial microbes. So that means that the good guys have died off. And so common causes of this are antibiotic use, high sugar, high fat, and low fiber diets. The way that that plays a role into it is that certain bacterias, they prefer sugar. So for example, yeast, especially if, like in cases of candida overgrowth, or for people who are beer drinkers, like for alcohol, when you drink beer, you are consuming yeast and you are changing your gut microbiome. So you are changing your the amount of the different proportions of gut bacteria in your gut when you are ingesting things that are fermented. And then in terms of the low fiber, fat sources are also a source of food for the bacteria, so that can also change the proportions. And then fiber acts as a prebiotic. So the difference between prebiotics and probiotics are that probiotics are the actual bacteria that live in your gut. Prebiotics are the food for the bacteria. So it's important that we continue to feed our bacteria, but it's important that we also feed the bacteria with good things, and that's usually fiber. Having diverse fiber usually means having a situation that is more correlated to this one at the top. So the higher diversity of things. Food poisoning can also cause dysbiosis in the gut. Alcohol, like I said, for example, the beer, and then also traveling. The reason why I brought up traveling is because usually when we travel to other places, sometimes the water quality isn't as good. And so even just brushing your teeth, drinking that water, that cross-contamination, even also with ice as well, can play a role in your gut microbiome and gut health. So as I said earlier, the further down that we go into our digestive system, the more bacteria that we have. So in our stomach, we have around 1,000 bacteria per milliliter of fluid. In our small intestine, we have around 10,000. And in our large intestine, I actually had to look this up. I think this is 10 billion. I think this is billion because this is the million mark. So I think this is billion. We have like 10 billion bacteria per milliliter of fluid. That is a lot. So we just continue to grow back, like have more and more bacteria as we go down in the tract. This picture on the right-hand side is what we would see for someone who has SIBO. So SIBO is also known as small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this is a common sign of, it's a common cause of dysbiosis. And so what it is it's a leaking of bacteria from the large intestine into the small intestine. And so that sphincter, for whatever reason, some of our 10 billion bacteria that's located in our large intestine just sneaks into our small intestine, and it starts propagating, and it just sets up camp there. And so while it sets up camp in our small intestine, it starts to make two main gases. So it can either make hydrogen or it can make methane. And so this is a very common cause of gas and bloating in patients. And so it's just, it's actually very hard to treat because a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, is also has to do with peristalsis and the migrating motor complex. So that downward movement, it slows down motility, which makes it even harder to treat. So I just wanted to put this out there as well, just to, yeah, so that's how dysbiosis can cause gas and bloating with the increase of hydrogen and the methane. Okay, so now we're moving on to the fluid reasons of why someone would bloat or swell. So dehydration. So I put in this picture just because most people, when they wake up in the morning, they started off with their morning coffee, and some people, if they're retired or lucky, they're able to end it with a glass of wine. And so both of these things are very dehydrating for the body. So if you've ever gone out for a night of drinking, or if you know friends who go out and you notice that they get a little bit swollen or puffy after that night of drinking, the reason behind that is because when you drink alcohol, that alcohol actually inhibits antidiuretic hormone, or it's also called vasopressin as well. And so that causes someone to urinate more, to pee more. And so if you're ever out with friends and you're on your second margarita and they're like, no, don't go to the washroom, don't break the seal. They're talking about this effect of vasopressin on our digestive system in like going to the washroom, having to urinate more. So it blocks our ability to keep fluids in our body, and it just allows the channels to flow. So we urinate more, and because the body always wants to be in balance, it doesn't want to die. So you kind of have a bloating effect. You have a rebound effect where your body swells and it retains fluid. And so it's actually the movement from when you pee, you're getting rid of extracellular fluid. So we have intracellular fluid and we have extracellular fluid. When you go to the washroom, you're getting rid of that extracellular fluid. And because of osmosis, water moving from high concentration to low concentration, you have water inside the cell leaching out into the extracellular fluid to make that balance. But once you stop drinking, you start to retain even more fluids, and sometimes you'll notice that you'll just be a little bit swollen. Sometimes you can have just like you just feel waterlogged, if that makes sense. So that's how dehydration can cause that water swelling, that water bloat. And then the last cause is hormonal. So the reason why I have a picture of the female menstrual cycle is because most of the time when we look at hormonal bloating, antidiuretic hormone is also another hormone that contributes to this. But in particular, when we look at hormonal bloating or hormonal like weight gain, it's due to an accumulation of fluid, and usually it coincides with a woman's menstrual cycle. And so usually that's due to fluctuating estrogen and progesterone levels. And so a lot of women, when it comes to their time of the month, like with their premenstrual symptoms, some women do get like physically bloated in and around the time of their period. And so unfortunately, that's very common, but that's actually not normal. Yeah, that's not normal. Okay. So with all of those things, it's important to test, not guess. So we have a lot of great tools in the office that can help us determine what the root cause of your bloating is. So we have a stool culture that So it's called the Comprehensive Metabolic Test. What it does is that it's able to screen for different types of infection that can be causing gas and bloating, and it looks at the stool and it cultures to see if any parasites or microbes or any other things could be in there. So that's also important. We do also have specialty testing like the SIBO breath test or the salivary cortisol test to check those things. We have environmental allergen panels as well as food sensitivity panels as well to see if food intolerance or even seasonal allergies could be a cause for you. And then there's also some, there's also some blood work that we can do as well. So we can run AM cortisol to see how your stress levels are. Calprotectin in particular looks at the inflammation of your bowel health. And so calprotectin is an important marker when we're looking at more serious inflammatory bowel diseases. So this includes ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. Calprotectin will usually be increased in those instances. And then we also have the ability to do imaging. So whether it's ultrasound or even just like putting a scope in to check out how your stomach is doing, or even doing colonoscopies as well. Okay, so yes. So our digestive system is our body's ability to transform food into energy. If our digestive tract isn't able to be as efficient as possible, it does not allow our bodies to be able to absorb and create as much energy and to utilize the food to its fullest. So if your digestive system is not so good, it also means that your body's not able to make the energy that it needs to support it throughout the day. And mood. Okay, cool. So we're kind of talking about how our digestive system affects our energy and mood. So with mood, serotonin. So serotonin is known as the happy hormone. It is responsible, if you've ever had like the butterflies in the stomach, that is serotonin. That is serotonin in the gut. And so with serotonin plays a role in gut motility. But in terms of the mood piece, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. And 90% of serotonin receptors are found in the digestive tract. And so because serotonin, when we think of serotonin, we think of it as the happy hormone. And usually low levels of serotonin are closely linked to low mood, depression, and that sort of thing. And so common antidepressants are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so SSRIs. And so if 95% of serotonin is made in the gut and 90% of serotonin receptors are found in the digestive tract, maybe our gut also has a role to play in our mood, and it's not just a brain thing. So let's keep going. So serotonin, it is responsible for gut motility. So the more serotonin that we have in our gut, the faster the motility. So the more diarrhea of a picture. The lower amounts of serotonin, we're looking at the constipated picture. So this is, tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid that is found, high amounts of it are found in turkey. So if you've ever had after like a Thanksgiving meal, after having some good turkey, usually we feel happy and we also feel sleepy. So if we look at the what tryptophan gets converted into, it becomes converted into 5-hydroxytryptophan, and then that becomes converted into serotonin, so the happy hormone, and then that gets converted into N-acetyl 5-HT, which gets converted into melatonin. And melatonin, if you're not already aware, helps with our circadian rhythms and helps with sleep. So it's no surprise that after that turkey dinner, we feel happy and then we go to sleep and we take a nap. Okay, and so this brings me to psychobiotics. So what are psychobiotics? Psychobiotics are probiotics that confer mental health benefits to the host when ingested. So yes, it's actually some pretty exciting stuff. Most of the things that I've read up on have been on animal studies. So they're testing certain probiotic strains on mice, and they've seen that when introducing certain strains in mice, they've found that it can affect not only mood, so anxiety and depression scores. It can also play a role in the mice's personality type, so extroversion, for example. I was able to find some like human studies, so I'm gonna go through that with you now. Okay, so in terms of anxiety, so I found there was a study on the effects of chronic treatment with new strains of Lactobacillus plantarum on cognitive and anxiety depressive like behaviors in male mice. Sorry, so this was a mouse study. The interesting thing that I found from this study is that by introducing Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium, that it's capable of producing not just serotonin, but also increasing GABA. And so low serotonin, we think of low mood, but low GABA is associated with more anxiety. And so I thought it was interesting that by just introducing these two types of bacterial strains into our GI tract, that it can exert, mood modifying effects. The interesting thing when I was actually reading up about these studies is that if you remember at the beginning, I said that the enteric nervous system can work independently of the vagus nerve. They found that even when just changing the variety of bacteria in our gut, they found that that can act independently of if the vagus nerve is sending sensory or motor information to our gut. So I thought that that was really cool because that was it's independent of the enteric nervous system, and that things are just happening based on the different types and the different strains that are found in our gut microbiome. Yes, I think that's all that I wanted to talk about for this one. The next one that I found was a study on personality type. So there's personality typing called Oceans, and Oceans Ocean stands for openness, O for openness, C for conscientiousness, E for extroversion. So that means like whether someone's more introverted or extroverted, if they get their energy from being around people or from being alone. Agreeableness is the ability to go with the flow, and neuroticism measures how someone their propensity to think that something bad is going to happen. That's what neuroticism is. So sorry, I didn't so in terms of openness, it's like their openness to try new things, and then conscientiousness is, are they able to do the right thing? And so it was a study in 2018. And so in this study, they ended up just finding correlations, which I thought was really interesting. So these correlations, so they found that in high neuroticism, so neuroticism is the measure of thinking that something bad is going to happen. They found that people with higher scores of that had a higher abundance of gamma proteobacteria, this middle one that I'm not going to try to pronounce, and Haemophilus species. So it had higher abundance of those probiotic species in people who have that high neuroticism personality type. For low conscientiousness, so the ability to do the right thing, was correlated with a high abundance of proteobacteria. And then whereas high conscientiousness, so the ability to do the right thing in certain situations, had a high abundance of lactospiraceae. And then high agreeableness was correlated with higher alpha diversity of gut bacteria. So of course, this was just a correlational study. They just found that, oh, people with this personality type tend to have these bacteria. So I thought that was interesting. Moving on into mental health. So psychobiotics as a treatment for anxiety, depression, and related symptoms. So this was a systematic review. And what they found in this one was that, so they found that 6 out of the 12 studies found probiotics to reduce depression, and 2 out of the studies found that probiotics reduced anxiety. So anyways, the research is still pretty new, but I think that it's really interesting that how probiotics and even just changing our microflora can make a difference in anxiety, depression, especially after coming out of COVID. Okay, and then brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So what is this? BDNF plays an important role in neuronal survival and growth and participates in neuronal plasticity. So this is essential for learning and memory. It also regulates glucose and energy metabolism. And pretty much at the end of the day, lower BDNF levels are associated with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, and Huntington's disease. One of the studies that I was looking at found that by supplementing Bifidobacterium longum, so that's a certain probiotic species, they found that BDNF actually increased, and people had less anxiety, and it also increased their memory overall. So I thought that was super cool. Okay, so obstacles to treatment. So at the end of the day, what is causing us to bloat? So usually it's because of the standard American diet, and we like what we like. So when we go to the grocery store, we're buying the same foods over and over again, whether it's because we're animals of habit or we just like what we like. All of these things can play a role in diversifying our gut bacteria and our gut microbiome. A low fiber intake, not many of us actually eat enough fiber throughout our day, so we don't actually eat enough fruits and vegetables. And then stress and antacids, the use of antacids when we do have heartburn or indigestion is a lot, and that down regulates the amount of gastric juice that we have, and further makes our ability to digest food, it lowers that ability. And stress, just our society and life happens. So stress is a big obstacle to treatment. And so instead, it's important to just change up what you buy at the grocery store. So try different fruits and vegetables that you don't really get. Have things that are seasonal. Try different vegetables. Just change up. Try a new recipe. All of those things by increasing the amount of fiber in our diet. Fiber is a source of prebiotics, which is food for our probiotics. All of those things can help in maintaining a healthy microbiome and a healthy gut bacteria in our digestive system. And please continue to stay hydrated and drink water. We do live in the desert. It did get really hot last week, and it's only going to get hotter from here. So please continue to stay hydrated and drink water, because that can also be a big reason of just like the water bloat and the fluid retention in that sense. So some takeaways for today: stress and age both of those things down-regulate our digestive enzymes. So the more stress we have, the less gastric juice and the less digestive enzymes that we are producing. So that inhibits our ability to fully digest and turn that food into energy. And then slowly, unfortunately, as we age, as all things, those cycles downregulate. So continue to please do whatever it is you do to manage your stress. Continue to keep hydrated. So please remember coffee, so caffeine and alcohol are dehydrating for the body. So continue to please try to drink other liquids. The water that you use to make your coffee does not count. So please try to get something else in there. And then lastly, I hope that you thought that psychobiotics were super interesting, because I think they're super interesting. Your microbiome and even just the biodiversity that you find in there can play a huge role in your mood, your personality type, and even your memory. Great. So if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat box and I can answer those for you now. And of course, if you're interested in any of the testing that I talked about, or you're interested in getting a sense of discussing your personal health, I am available for free 15-minute consults as well. And so our website and our phone number is here.
Awesome. Yeah, this was a super interesting webinar, like super, super interesting. So I hope you were just as fascinated as I was listening through everything that you had tonight. So we'll take a couple minutes here. If you have any questions, type them into the chat. We'll be sure to answer them for you. Thank you, Dr. Ashley, for hosting this webinar, and thank you for everyone for sticking around to the end. I hope you learned something new about all the factors that can contribute to your bloating and digestive health and your overall health. I mean, it's all connected. And took away some tips and treatments you can do to help with those symptoms and get you back on track for your health. If you take anything away from this webinar, I hope you understand that there is a physician out there who will take the time to understand your health goals and work with you to create a solid treatment plan that's best for you and your lifestyle. Again, if you have any specific questions pertaining to your personal care, I highly recommend scheduling a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ashley. She'll be able to thoroughly answer your questions and help you to navigate treatment options. So you can call the office. The office number, I put that into the chat, or it's on the screen, or you can message me to your phone number and I can reach out to you tomorrow as well. Let me see.
Was there a question with that, Alicia? There are times that after I finish eating, I feel like that's a little bit of a fragmented sentence.
It is a little bit vague. I'm curious to see.
I know. I'll just wait until the rest of, hopefully that message comes through. Yeah, thank you so much for sticking around for the rest of the talk. I know that anyways, everyone's super busy, and so I really do appreciate you taking the time to come out and learn more about your digestive health. Yay, thanks, Sheila.
We do have a bunch of resources as well. So if there's something that you're looking for, even if it's gut related or not gut related, sports medicine or hormones, anything like that, you can always reach out to our office and I can send those to your way. We've got seriously a ton of videos and blog posts, podcast episodes, all about everything that you could possibly want to learn about. So all of our doctors are educators at heart, and we would love to share that information as well. And then I hope everyone had their questions, type them into the chat. But that's all we had for this webinar today. And thank you again for everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.
Okay, so I'm just gonna answer that question. So Alicio said, I can hear my stomach growling even though I just finished eating. Is that the stomach fluid breaking down the food? So a question, I can't ask specific questions, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna talk and process because I can't give direct advice. In terms of even though I finished eating, my question honestly is when your stomach growling, so that stomach growling, we use a term for it, it's called borborygmi. It's a sign that so there are the stomach sounds. So for example, let's say before you're eating, when you hear that stomach rumble, that is literally your stomach telling your brain to eat because you've been ignoring that all day. And so, when you feel that like that hunger and you're like, ooh, I could eat. And then when you get into like, when your stomach is growling, that means that your stomach is upset that you have not eaten yet. And it's trying to get your attention so that you eat. In terms of your stomach growling after you finished eating, I think that could honestly be, so there are two things that I'm thinking. It could honestly just be the peristaltic process. So you remember that downward movement that I was talking about that happens in your body. It could honestly just be things moving. And especially if it's been a long time since you've had your last meal, it could honestly be air dislodging, or just like it's kind of that movement and things are getting warmed up in the system. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I would kind of have to ask you a couple more questions, but honestly, that's my guess, that it's things moving around. It's kind of like the warm up, or now that things are in there, your gut motility, all of your intestines, all of those things are moving around. Does that make sense?
Cool. That was a super great answer. And my stomach is now growling too. But
That is
I know
great.
that I'm
That
hungry,
means
so.
that
Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone again for joining us tonight. And then we look forward to connecting with you soon.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.